Princess Charlotte bid farewell to Sir Lest, expressing her anticipation for their future activities as sword friends. Lest acknowledged her words. His father, Gad Albion, humbly responded to the princess, expressing his honor and inviting her return anytime. The next morning, Charo departed the mansion early, returning to the royal capital. Marquis Gad Albion's frustration boiled over. He muttered angrily, questioning why, of all people, it had to be Lest who garnered the princess's favor, declaring his son utterly worthless. His anger then turned to Edward and Sidward, as he demanded if they understood the gravity of their actions, reminding them they had nearly ruined the Albion family. Zira, the Marquis's first wife, quickly interjected, asserting that his assessment wasn't entirely correct. She acknowledged that they had indeed put Lady Charlotte in danger, but argued it was to follow his own instructions to make a good impression on Her Highness. The Marquis, however, redirected his fury, demanding how they would take responsibility for Her Highness becoming interested in his worthless son. Lest, overhearing this, murmured his confusion, not quite understanding what his father was implying about responsibility. Edward, visibly frightened, then tried to defend himself and his brother, asserting that the princess's interest in Lest was based on a lie. The Marquis reacted with shock, but then a dawning realization seemed to cross his face. Edward vehemently exclaimed his disbelief, arguing there was no way his foolish younger brother could have defeated a gale wolf. The Marquis paused, acknowledging that Her Highness had claimed to see it with her own eyes. Edward continued his fervent denials, insisting that they must have weakened the monster before they passed out, and his foolish brother merely landed the final, unseen blow, taking advantage of the confusion to convince Her Highness. Edward adamantly declared that Lest's actions should absolutely not be forgiven. The Marquis absorbed Edward's explanation, a look of confirmation spreading across his face as he concluded that if Edward's account was true, then everything makes sense. Lest, overhearing this exchange, found himself bewildered by his family's logic, thinking, "Are these guys idiots?" He inwardly reflected that while Edward and Sidward certainly did attack the gale wolf, their stances were weak, and they weren't dealing any real damage. He asserted to himself that he, Lest, was undoubtedly the one who defeated the gale wolf. The Marquis, however, loudly rebuked Lest for continuing to make such claims, calling him a shameless fool and telling him to know his place. Lest, unflustered, calmly maintained that he was telling the truth. The Marquis reacted with frustration, then challenged Lest to prove it. Lest questioned how, and Edward and Sidward readily accepted their father's demand. The Marquis then laid down the challenge. Lest was to duel both Edward and Sidward at the same time, and achieve victory. Lest reacted with shock at the prospect of facing both his brothers simultaneously. The Marquis pressed him, questioning if Lest had not just handled something that Edward and his brother couldn't handle together. He continued, asserting that if Lest's claims were true, this duel should be easy for him. Edward, brimming with arrogant confidence, exclaimed that it was a splendid idea. Sidward, sharing his brother's smugness, added that while a 2-on-1 fight went against chivalry, the goddess would surely forgive them if it was to expose his foolish brother's lies. Lest, observing their attitudes, understood their angle. He internally acknowledged that if Edward and Sidward could fight without panicking and use their actual strength, they were not so weak as to be overwhelmed by a gale wolf. 1-on-1 against him, Lest knew it would be nearly an even match, making a 2-on-1 scenario virtually unwinnable. However, that was only true until yesterday. Lest's thoughts then shifted to his current self, who had tamed Geralt and obtained new power, concluding that that logic no longer applies. With newfound resolve, Lest calmly accepted the duel. Edward, Sidward, and their father all looked at him with shocked expressions as Lest confirmed his acceptance of the challenge.